Did you give the thumbs up, Scott? I didn't see it.
Did you get that message, Ashley, being live streamed?
I did, but I didn't see a thumbs up from Scott. So
We are live.
All right, I'm Ashley Davies, Chair of the Master Plan Implementation Committee in Town of Northborough. This open meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of June 16th, 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. All members of the Master Plan Implementation Committee are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows the Master Plan Implementation Committee to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to Northborough Remote Meetings on YouTube via the link listed on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Rick Leaf.
I'm here.
Jean Kennedy.
Here.
Millie Milton.
Here.
Jean Cahill.
Here.
Fran Backstrom.
Here.
John Campbell.
Here.
Dario Damari.
Here.
Julianne Hirsch.
Here.
Tracy Camarano.
Here.
Amy Pretsky.
Here.
Great. And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Scott Charpentier.
Present.
John Kudir.
Present.
All right. Call this meeting to order. So looking back at the agenda, I think first thing on the agenda was minutes from December. Did anybody have any comments or concerns?
And a couple of
Julianne?
changes, Madam Chairman.
Oh, sure. Julianne and then Rick.
Okay.
Okay, so thanks, Madam Chairman. Under the Northborough Cultural Council Public Art Campaign presentation, at the end of the first paragraph, I think we should add, Ms. Cox went over several of the master plan goals that public art aligns with. It didn't say anything in this whole thing that the presentation used our goals to support their public art projects. So the sentence would be, Ms. Cox went over several of the master plan goals that public art aligns with. And then in addition to that, after that sentence, I think we should say that several members commented that the project would be a positive addition to the downtown. As I recall, there were a lot of positive comments about that presentation. And then after the second paragraph, I think we should say it was clarified that and this is in quotations, go outside Northborough, end of quotes, is a temporary installation. I can send those to Michelle if you want.
Sure.
Okay.
I think I got them, but it would be good just in case.
All right, that's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Julianne.
You're welcome.
And Rick, you had some comments too.
Yeah, so in the Northborough Cultural Council Public Art Campaign section, in the second sentence of this, the second line says the goal of the campaign to be a force for placemaking. So that's a typo. It should be the goal of the campaign is to be a force for placemaking. So
Yeah.
it can change into is. In the section, review all master plan goals pertaining to sidewalk and pedestrian improvements. The very beginning, it says right now, Mr. Leaf said, in reading that plan, which is a little bit confusing whether I was talking about the master plan goals or the community development plan. So I want to clarify that and change. Have it say, Mr. Leaf said, in the 2004 Community Development Plan, and then continue with pedestrian topics. So replace reading that plan with, referencing the Community Development Plan. And then the only other thing I had was at the end, it said the adjournment time was 7:41. I think the adjournment time was 8:41.
Oh, yeah, okay,
That's what I got.
okay.
I think Amy's got her hand up too.
Yeah, Amy?
Yep, I just had a couple too. On the second page, 1, 2, 3, 4 down, when it's talking about complete streets, the last sentence, it said, he said in summary, there were 2 paths and plans. In the last sentence there, it says to incorporate shared lines, but I think that would be lanes. Wasn't
yeah.
that Scott? Yep. Shared lanes.
Yeah, that's shared
And-
lanes, correct.
Yep, and then the same page, third paragraph from the bottom, when it's Miss Jubert, the third sentence down where she said the community development plan and for almost 3 years worked to make, it was just about every zoning suggestion. It wasn't every zoning suggestion. I went back and listened. So it was just adding just about.
Trying to find that.
Okay, it's the same, I think it's second page, third paragraph up,
Okay.
where it starts with Miss Jubert.
Okay, I see it, yeah.
Yep. And then I think there's one more, I just gotta scroll. I just had a question for on the next page, and this is for Mr. Kennedy. In his paragraph, the second sentence, in his third page, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph, second sentence, it says through downtown Northborough and the cars act as a barrier. He was talking about on-street parking, and I thought it would be the parking acts as a barrier for the sidewalks, not the cars. But Mr. Kennedy might want to
Right.
read that. But it doesn't make sense that the cars act as a barrier.
Well, the parked cars,
Not so much a barrier as just
a buffer.
creating a little bit more safe environment for a pedestrian because there's a row of parked vehicles there.
Okay, so maybe parked cars make sense, because when I read that and it said the cars act as a barrier, I thought, the passing cars. So,
I think,
No.
I think the point there, Amy, was the parked cars act as a barrier and they really
Yep.
lend a feeling of safety. And that's what that was the subject matter on that one.
Right.
yes. I just didn't get it out of the way it was written.
Perfect.
I thought that sentence meant that you meant to say traffic acts as a barrier in that.
Speeding,
End
the
of that
speeding
sentence?
cars.
No, I remember him saying, yeah, he was talking about the parked cars kind of provide a buffer. It makes you feel safer when they're there.
Yeah.
It's a
So
big space between a pedestrian on a sidewalk when there's a parked car between them and the traffic.
And that was as opposed to the sidewalk on Route 135 is what we were contrasting it to, where the
Yeah.
sidewalk was right on the street. And then he brought up the subject, geez, if you have street parking, those cars act as a barrier, so you feel safer, even though the sidewalk's on the street. It's on the street, but then there's parked cars, and then there's the moving traffic. That was the intent of the whole comment.
Does it make sense now with the park?
Yeah, I mean, I added a little, I put, parked cars act as a barrier to provide a feeling of safety. Does that make sense, Jean?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And then my last one was 2 paragraphs down where it said Mr. Leaf. And I think it was Mr. Leaf said it may be premature. I think just the word said is missing.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and that was it.
Are there any other comments or edits? All right. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve?
I'll
the
move
minutes?
that we accept the minutes as amended.
Second,
All right. And I'll do a roll call. Rick Leaf, you already seconded. I'll call on you anyway. Rick Leaf,
Aye.
Jean Kennedy,
Aye.
Millie Milton,
Aye.
Jean Cahill,
Aye.
Fran Backstrom,
Aye.
John Campbell,
Aye.
Dario Damari,
Aye.
Julianne Hirsch,
Aye.
Tracy Camarano,
Aye.
Amy Pretsky.
Aye.
Okay, minutes pass. All right, I'll send these over to Michelle. Next on the agenda, which is just basically the rest of the meeting, is the discussion of the scope of work that Donnie sent around, or Donnie prepared and Michelle sent around. And I was thinking to get started, Donnie can kind of take us on a quick walk through the scope. And then we can have a discussion afterwards on any questions that have arisen or concerns. And we can kind of polish it up. But after this meeting, I do want to give people time to provide written edits or comments or questions as well. So we'll take some time to finalize this before we put it out. So Donnie, looks like you're already sharing, so I'll turn it over to you.
I'm all set and ready to go, Ashley. So thank you for
Cool.
that. And if you had, like Ashley said, if you haven't had a chance to do a deep dive into this, we are going to just go over it at a high level. And as Ashley said, we'll allow you guys to have a little bit more time to review and provide your detailed comments. Today night, I'll be taking notes as we go along. So I'll be allowing myself to refine this after the fact, and then taking your comments that you'll be providing post-meeting and refining it even further. So it's also important to note that this document is not going to be, it's fairly obvious, but it just to state it plainly, this is just the scope of work, right? So it's not going to be the full package, the full bid package, the full RFP. There's going to be a lot more detail that's preceding it and attached to it. Really, this is just getting at what the project is and what tasks are going to be performed to prepare the downtown vision plan. So there are.
Can I stop you for a second, Donnie?
Sure, Rick, go ahead.
So for the information of the rest of the committee, each Wednesday prior to these meetings, Ashley and I have a session with Donnie to sort of go over how the meeting is going to run and what's going to happen. And we went over this and talked about some things that Ashley and I saw that could be changed. I think, Donnie, what you've got up here is different than what was sent out to the committee.
Yes, thank you. I was going to get to that, Rick, but
Okay, so that's why it is. So just need to speak to that somehow. I just want to let the committee know why there's a difference.
Yeah, as we go along, I'll call out and call attention to the things that we did change based on our conversation. So thank you for that. So there are 6 tasks that we identified here. In your version, there are 5 tasks. I'll explain the additional task as we move along. But as taking a step back, the project purpose, which is usually included in an RFP or a scope of work, is going back to the 2020 master plan. Obviously, that's why we're here as an implementation committee. The master plan put forth a goal of enhancing downtown by promoting a pleasing and welcoming appearance, one that promotes a sense of place, enabling it to become the community's proud central gathering area for residents and visitors alike. And there was a complementary and supporting action or recommendation: conduct a design study of downtown to help focus ideas and develop a clear vision for the area. So this goal and this action is the impetus for this this plan and the scope of work. So task 1 is simply project initiation and management. So what we said is there's a few subtasks here, just 2. 1.1 is kickoff meeting and site tour. For this particular kickoff meeting, we're going to be meeting with town staff. We're going to be meeting with the downtown planning committee. And I do have this highlighted because we want to just, sort of sort through whether or not there is going to be a downtown planning committee, if it's going to be the implementation committee or a subsection of the implementation committee that's really going to take the reins here in the development of this plan. And perhaps later on down the line, when there is a plan to implement, maybe that's the downtown planning committee, just a point of discussion. I called it the downtown planning committee here because it was that was baked into the master plan from 2020, but obviously, context changes. This committee is now created, so just a point of discussion. So we'll be meeting with the town staff and whatever committee is formed in support of this and other key stakeholders as necessary to go over the scope of work, the schedule, milestone dates, and really to understand the project boundary. This is just the first step in the development of the project boundary. We're just kind of throwing out ideas on where this boundary may fall. And then immediately following the meeting, we'll hope to have the consultant would hope to have the town lead it in a walking tour of the downtown area to get a better sense of it. 1.2 is, straight away just, project management, just establishing a point of contact for town staff and somebody to facilitate, the committee and preparing the document and providing that technical expertise. In terms of deliverables, kickoff meeting materials, monthly coordination meetings with the town staff, and then the project base map series. Actually, this should actually fall down. And the reason why I'm calling it to fall down is because we pulled out the project boundary as a separate task. Per conversation with Rick and Ashley, they felt that maybe this is more deserving of a separate task. That based on the early conversations with the committee, based on the tour of the downtown area, previous plans, and other resources, the consultant should really pool all of that together and then come to the committee with a preliminary project boundary. What I'm proposing is a primary zone and a transition zone because you don't really want a hard stop when you're doing this type of planning. You want some transition to make it, make fit the new land use scenario in the context of the community without abrupt changes. What we're saying here is that we'll present that project boundary, again, inclusive of that primary and transition zone, to the committee for comment, and then go back to the committee with a final refined version of that. We also did note, and this is an addition, that the project boundary should consider alternatives to the downtown business district or the area around the downtown business district, such as Business East, Business West, Business South. This was an addition based on Wednesday's conversation as well. And it's really just to make sure that we're considering all options in the development of the project boundary and weighing the pros and cons of the different areas and where ultimately the best location is for the downtown. And to go along with that project boundary, we're going to be creating, the consultant will create project base maps and really just their reference maps, existing conditions maps to show where the resources are, what is the existing land use, where is the existing infrastructure and utilities, things of that nature, really to just paint the area in terms of its assets and resources. Task 3 is the analysis. So taking those reference maps, taking the data behind those maps and doing the analysis, reviewing the plans, reviewing the land use regulations, the zoning, seeing what the current and future land uses are based on where the town is and where the town wanted to go during the process of developing the master plan, and looking at digging into it a little bit further, looking into property ownership, for example. Looking at mobility, where are the existing roadways, the sidewalks, bicycle facilities, the parking lots, taking a deeper look at traffic and safety. And there's a lot of work that you guys have been doing in that area. So there's a lot of synergies that could be had as part of this project. Utilities, I did make mention of that, but that's going to be important in terms of future development scenarios. So looking at water, looking at sanitary sewer, looking at fiber, all of that's going to be important. Working in the town of Westboro, I note that there's a moratorium because there's a limit in terms of the amount of wastewater that can be processed, and there's no new residential development or multifamily development in that downtown area. So that's an example of a limitation that the utilities provide. Or are that the utilities are limiting the development in the downtown area. Natural resources, you have the Assabet River there. We want to make some connectivities where it makes sense. Stormwater topography, floodplain characteristics, we also want to look at that. Historic and cultural resources, the town does have some registered properties. It does have properties of local importance that we want to look at, and I think that we want to preserve as well. So just inventorying them and their significance is going to be a part of this analysis. Sustainability and climate resilience. So this is something that wasn't included in the 2020 master plan. but is of increased importance moving forward for a lot of different communities as we tackle the climate crisis. So looking at sustainability, looking at the climate resilience, we don't want to be developing or proposing a land use scenario that isn't consistent with the exposure and the vulnerability, or creating more exposure and creating more vulnerabilities with respect to the climate impacts that may or may not be impacting the project boundary. And then other community resources. We want to take a look at the, the public facilities that are owned by the town, the old town hall, the new old town hall, and the old fire station, and the old fire station. All of those different resources, what role do those properties play in the redevelopment and revitalization of the project boundary? So those are the analyses that are going to be standard and built in to the existing conditions. We did talk about a market analysis, and this is important for any focused strategic and master plan. A market analysis takes a bigger look at the local economy, the regional economy. It takes a look at what what markets and uses can be absorbed by the town, what's within reach, what kinds of retail, what kinds of office space, what kind of housing, what is the market potential for those different types of uses. And there is a specific analysis that's done as part of that particular subtask 3.2. So in terms of task three, we're going to be looking to deliver, or the consultant would be looking to deliver existing conditions and technical analyses and market analyses summary report that will be ultimately folded into the full plan. So task four is also, quite important, engagement and communications. I did highlight here a few instances where Rick and Ashley had questions. The Downtown Planning Committee, we already went over. Whichever committee this is going to take is going to form, that role of this committee is going to be similar to the Master Plan Steering Committee, going to help guide the consultant in the development of the plan, going to serve as ground truthers of what's heard from the public, and just be able to help review and comment on draft documents, getting that plan to its final stages and final product. We'd make some notes here about what the committee, how the committee is going to be formed, and what the meetings are going to entail. We did say up to 3 committee meetings. The concern there was that that's not enough, and we'll work to see it add on 2 or more committee meetings. I think we had a total of 8 or so steering committee meetings as part of the Northborough master plan, if I'm not mistaken. That was a 1.5 year long effort, if I believe, if I remember correctly. But 3 at a minimum. I think we're going to be looking at, based on the conversation with Rick, and based on, and I open it up to this group as well, 5 meetings, 6 meetings, whatever the case may be. We usually put an up to certain number of meetings, and those meetings correspond to certain milestones. So, the kickoff meeting being one, another meeting to talk about the project boundary, another meeting to talk about, workshop ideas around scenario planning, and preparing for the public meeting and for a public meeting, and then, wrapping it all together. But there may be some milestones that we want to add in here that the committee wants to weigh in on. What we did add as subtask 4.2 is interviews with stakeholders and key stakeholders. So the makeup of the committee will be, quite diverse, but those that are not on the committee and not able to have a direct connection to the planning process, we want to get their feedback as well. So the consultant will interview key stakeholders that include business owners within the that exist within the project boundary, residents that exist within the project boundary, key groups that have an interest in the development of that area. We want to hear from them in terms of what their priorities are, what their interests are, what they want to see, and what their concerns are moving forward. This is very focused in terms of its, its scope. Having those conversations. We did put 1 day of interviews, but I believe it was you, Rick, that said that 1 day is perhaps not enough. So maybe you want to elaborate that during the discussion. But this is, like I said, this is very focused, whereas the public meetings are more broad-based. So you do want to get feedback from the rest of the community, not just those that have a specific and financial or operational or or some other type of very focused interest in the downtown, but others that are living in the community, but still want to see the best being pulled out of that area. And we saw that during the master plan too. A lot of folks commented on the downtown. That's why this particular project was elevated to a high priority status. So we want to hear from the broad community as well as those that have a specific interest in the area. We did say that there's about 2 public meetings here, and we didn't note during the Wednesday meeting whether or not that was sufficient or not. Because that went unsaid, perhaps it is, and fine in your opinion, Rick, but I open it up to the group as well. We intend to have that first meeting be a process where we're looking at the overall vision and getting, feedback on what the public wants to see out of that downtown. We do include a visual preference survey. So if anybody's familiar with a visual preference survey, we talked a little bit about it during the master plan, but it wasn't necessarily appropriate for the master plan, but is appropriate for a more focused plan like this, where we want to get feedback on what kind of design, what kind of building mass, what kind of fenestration and alignment with the streetscape do the folks want to see out of the massing and the presence of the buildings within the downtown area. So we want to get their feedback on what they want to see and what they don't want to see. And that second meeting will center around sharing the vision, the draft vision that was drafted after the first public meeting, and getting some feedback on that and presenting some initial concepts for the downtown. Of course, there'll have to be an online supplement to the public meetings. So it's going to be, if those meetings would be held in person, then certainly you want an online survey to mimic the questions and mimic the request for feedback that you presented in person. Online for those folks that are unable to attend. There could be a hybrid event as well for those public meetings, if that makes sense. But the online surveys, again, are really meant to supplement or mirror the public meetings, but then another survey could potentially be given in between certain milestones to get more focused feedback. This is left a little bit more open, I think. This could be up to two online surveys. That number could rise if you want to, again, receive very quick and focused feedback. What I have seen as of late is, you have a couple of longer surveys that bookmark on either end, some shorter surveys that go out in quick emails, 1 or 2, 3 questions that get you that quick feedback so you can, take it and run with it and move forward and do some refinement in the interim, as opposed to waiting toward the end. So I'm going to highlight this just for, conversation toward the end, but I'm just throwing that out there as a potential option. And then all of that, subtasks 4.1 through 4.4 would be summarized in a memorandum that would then be attached to the main document. Of course, the input received and included in that memorandum would be incorporated into the plan itself. But this summary is really meant for anybody to go back and see everything that was done and see everything that was said in one place. Task 5, and remember there's just one more task after this. Task 5 is visioning. So taking everything that we heard, taking all of that early analysis from task 2 and really pulling in, or task 3 rather, pulling it all together. So pulling the vision, the goals and the principles together that define where you want to see the downtown moving forward. We talked about the illustrative graphics. So we have 3D renderings and then a plan view and baked in here into the scope, really to show the design framework where where the town is recommending public spaces and placemaking elements, where there is going to be transportation improvements, including the pedestrian and bicycle network, how the connection to the Assabet River might take place. It's really just to illustrate what the vision of the downtown is going to look like. And again, taking some of the feedback from that visual preference survey that I mentioned earlier and sort of building it into the existing environment in a 3D manner. Roadway and streetscape design. So we talked a little bit about this too. If you remember the presentation a couple of meetings ago, there was a number of add-on tasks, and one of them was, the urban design and the creation of illustrative graphics that we just talked about, and another one was looking at transportation design to some extent. So looking at up to two, options for pedestrian and bicycle improvements along local roadways. One comment that Rick had, and I think Ashley agreed, was that, perhaps we don't say not including Route 20 Main Street, because the intent there was, you don't really have a lot of opportunity to change Route 20 Main Street, but rather don't ignore Route 20, but how do you mitigate the traffic along Route 20 to allow the reconfiguration or the other streets within the downtown to thrive and not be inhibited by that traffic, by Route 20. So how do you get them to work together? And then, as I said, up to two options, but looking at various roadway designs in the process and how to enhance and utilize them to enhance the sense of a place in the downtown area. And one of the things that also came up in conversation was green infrastructure. So as part of this roadway and streetscape design, looking at integrating green infrastructure into these roadways in a manner that can be replicated elsewhere in the downtown and elsewhere in the community. So looking at planting and the growth of street trees, landscaping, and other green infrastructure like rain gardens, just depicting that and building that into the vision and into the illustrative graphics. And then taking all of those elements and just producing a cohesive summary document. The vision summary document is subtask 5.4. So that is all of the the existing conditions and the planning for the future. And then task 6 is really just pulling it all together. So you have to have an implementation component. You guys are well familiar with that. So looking at all of the intersections with that future-looking scenario, how does it impact the zoning bylaw review? What does an urban design and development strategy look like? What does your mobility strategy look like? What partnerships and funding opportunities are there going to be? And then prioritizing the project list in terms of short-term, medium-term, and long-term phases. And then that is the implementation component, similar to what was produced for the master plan, that we're sitting here for, in that Excel document and in that last chapter in the plan itself, creating that matrix, understanding the cross sections between all of the different other plans that the community has, and making sure that they all speak to each other. And then task 6.2 through 6.4 is really just, drafting it, presenting it, refining it, and finalizing, the plan itself. So that is that brief overview, Ashley, of the scope of work that we prepared with, some caveats and some changes that were made since the scope of work did go out. Did you want to comment, Rick or Ashley, on before we open it up for further discussion?
I mean, I'd like to hear what others have to say first, I think. I think I noted all of the areas where I'd like to hear some discussion, but I'm gonna open it to questions first, and then whatever doesn't get covered through others' questions, I'll make sure we go through all those items that were flagged.
I'd also just like to add a comment that we need to focus tonight on the plan itself and not spend a lot of time talking about the details of what the downtown would look like. I mean, that will come out of whoever does this plan for us. So our mission tonight is to make sure we have a scope of work here that will go into the RFP that goes out to consultants and we think is asking for the right types of things. So we need to focus our energy tonight on refining the plan and not trying to actually do the downtown project as part of this meeting tonight. So hopefully we can keep those two things. I know it's going to be difficult to start not getting down to the details of the actual doing of the work, but the idea tonight is just to get Donnie to come back and finalize so we've got something to go into the RFP that we can send out and eventually hire someone to do this work for us. So I'll just add that comment.
Right. This isn't the kickoff. This isn't subtask 1.1. We're not having the early discussions about the project boundary. But to Rick, your point, we're really trying to refine this. So where, are there elements that are missing that you wanted to see in this plan? Are there tasks that you wanted to see? Do you think that there's areas that need augmenting? Do you think there's areas that are unnecessary? Or is there more detail necessary in certain areas of the scope of work? All of these questions are facilitating questions that can drive the conversation.
Yeah, so I'm going to open it up now to see if anybody has any first questions or items that they felt were missing from the plan.
Yeah, this is Dario. I just want to make sure the color of the flagpole, no, I'm kidding. On the mobility, the mobility and strategy, is that a phasing plan somewhere here? How we would phase this? I know implementation plan is different than phasing, or is it? So we've finalized the project, and then to do certain things, other things have to happen prior to that. Will we have that phasing plan as part of this final report, where it shows a sequence of events to get to where we want to be?
Yeah, I think, Dario, I think that would be part of that implementation strategy, and we could build it in. Is there a reason why you called out the mobility specifically?
I was just, it's transportation strategy. I was just looking at a part here that it might have been in, and maybe it's just in the implementation, because, it just, when we get done with projects, sometimes it's great, but if the main entry is where the main entry is, you can't ever get there without shutting down the town for 2 years. So whoever was doing this, I was just wondering if somewhere here there was just a high level phasing plan as part of the deliverable.
Well, to my knowledge, from a transportation perspective, the phasing plan would be part of that, the project development phase, not to be redundant with the use of that word. No, I mean, in terms of specific projects and the phasing of the implementation of that project, no, the phasing would not be part of that. But in terms of general phasing and implementation steps, some of that would be built into the implementation strategy. So if there are, critical, actions that need to be addressed prior to other actions, that's something that could be built into the implementation strategy, and called out specifically in the scope of work. So for example,
yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Okay. Yep.
Some things can happen simultaneously. We could fix up the bridge at the same time we're addressing the park at the same time we're doing this. So those could all happen, but one of them, we can't move the roads until the building's been torn down. We can't tear down the building until, so somewhere the duration for the implementation, and just to your point, the critical sequences, we usually do some type of a phasing plan to say, here's about how long it would take to implement this. Here's the schedule. Of course, it can always change, but to have that map, how to get from where we are today to this plan with, big broad brush milestone schedules, and kind of a Gantt chart of that has to happen before that happens, a simple one. So everybody understands, is this 12 years or 2 years? Or 22 years, whatever, and then finances will kick in. There's all kinds of other parameters, that's all great, but we don't have any money.
Right.
Okay.
That would be helpful if that's something that we can put into this, because that was something that was coming to my mind as we were going through this. If it's the same sort of as what the end result of the downtown of the overall town master plan was, it's more broad. It's not you're not envisioning it happening in a short time frame. Whereas with the downtown, if you really want to make it successful, you kind of need to do it in a certain order and in a certain time frame. Otherwise, it's stretched out and you're not completing things the way that you sort of anticipated. So I think that would be really helpful, as Dario suggested.
It may just be semantics and different words. When we're done, we have 3 things as a deliverable: the scope, which is everything drawn up, the cost, because nothing happens without paying for it, and the schedule. So it's, here's the scope, here's everything we want to do, here's how much it's going to cost, because then that'll be up to the town to say, geez, we can do phase 1 and 2 because they're only $300,000, but phase 3 is 4.2 million. That, even though it wants to happen next, we won't be able to get that until we get our finances in order. So in some cases, the cost will be the dictator of the schedule, but we can at least get these 5 things done within our budget because you've got a schedule for scope, cost, and schedule. That's all. That's all.
Mhm.
Ashley?
Yep, John?
I wanted to discuss the engagement with stakeholders, specifically our local business owners and property owners, and how that ties to the strategy and ultimately to the vision. You know, understanding that a private business owner in town, keeping within zoning bylaws, can do what they want, and the look of their property can be as it is within reason. I think the reality in Northborough is we have a very diverse amount of buildings and businesses, some of them partially finished, some of them not started, some of them, you know, perhaps taking advantage of their property and not particularly keeping it in the way that, you know, you might want to envision in this sense of place. So I'm curious about whether that needs to be a bigger part of the strategy, because I don't think you can change much about the look and the direction of sub villages within town unless we also incorporate the possibility that, you know, can we buy out properties? What's the budget for that? Can you discuss the changing of a business owner's property? It might just be signage, but yeah, it seems like one day of interviews, you might get a little bit of feedback, but how can we really expand on that partnership? I don't, you know, I see it discussed, but I wonder how much more of the plan it could be, because I think it's probably critical to changing those things that we can't control compared to sidewalks, bike lanes, trees and plantings, which we can control. Does that
So
make sense?
John, you started the comment by connecting it to the engagement and communication. So can you maybe just clarify that connection a little bit more for me?
Well, let me give you an example. If part of our vision is to change a certain look to downtown, I think that for substantial change, it might involve moving properties, taking down properties, changing how properties look, changing their position to the roadway. How could we know that that could be a part of the plan unless you engage it with those property owners? And then only then would you know if it could be part of your implementation strategy. Am I saying that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you're basically saying that, you know, as part of the planning process and the engagement process, the vision that may come out of the community is a certain look and feel is desired as part of the downtown, but there's a diverse set of buildings that have various levels of styles and setbacks and looks and locations and maintenance, and that and all of those are existing conditions that you know may work for or against that vision. So how, when you're developing that vision and setting recommendations for those visions, that vision, are we looking to get buy-in from property owners specifically on that vision to enable, you know, potential actions that that may impact them in terms of their properties? Is that?
Yes, and
Did-
you know, as another, for instance, what if your ultimate conclusion and vision were to involve, you know, the look or the relocation or creating space, whatever that might be, but you didn't know yet whether that was even a reality in the short term, because you know that property owner, that building is never going to be changed. So it seems to me that, I guess what I'm saying is, if there was not a focus on vetting that out, because we're dreaming here, you know, and if we didn't ask a particular property owner, you know, are you willing to sell? Could we get rid of your building? Does that clear the path to changing the entire look of a particular section of town? And if we didn't ask those questions, This is a hard one to ask, by the way, but if we didn't ask them, you'd be presenting a vision that you wouldn't know if it could be implemented. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say?
I think so, and I had two ways of tackling that that my response to that. One is you picked up on the word short term, so I just want to emphasize that this project is, and Ashley, you mentioned this too, that this is probably more of a shorter term thing, but there's going to be recommendations inevitably that come out of this. That's going to be a long term. You're not going to complete the plan and then have a brand new downtown once the downtown once the plan is completed. So, just thinking about the longer term, the transition of properties over a period of time, setting the tools and putting the tools in place so that enable the town to move those properties toward that long-term vision when those properties are, reach that stage of transition, whatever factor may, bring that about. I think that's important to note here in, probably in this conversation, but we could also make mention of it in the scope of work as well. The other piece of that is, you got to be careful not to have those types of concrete conversations as part of the planning process, because you don't want to, get into a stage where you're negotiating, properties during the planning stage. So I think you can get their feedback on the vision, get their feedback on what when you're having those stakeholder interviews and you're having those conversations with the property owners, you can relay some of the initial feedback that you got from the larger community and say, what do you think of this? How does this work with your long-term vision? And then you can start to tease out some of those ambitions and opportunities as part of that, as part of those conversations. So, and then build in again those recommendations and the tools that will enable the transitions down the line. Did
To
that?
John's point,
Yeah, I guess just
would it
concluding,
be
Rick,
possible?
just for a second. Hey, Rick, just concluding that point, I just think what I'm trying to say is not all business owners are Northborough residents.
Right.
And I think, I guess I would ask, consider a larger presence of the business and property owner input into the vision, so that it aligns with our citizens. So we live in town and we pay taxes, but just to have a dream of what we want to do without engaging those people that produce the revenue might be a little short-sighted. So that's the main point I wanted to add. Sorry to interrupt you, Rick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure if this would come out of the plan normally or whether it needs to be sort of specified, but some sort of as to John's point, a comparison of the vision to the reality and some ideas or recommendations about where there are disconnects, where issues may arise, what strategies the town might want to take to resolve differences between where the vision is going and what the current situation currently has, without actually getting into specifics about what to do, just that the plan would come out with a part of it would talk about the current reality compared to the vision and where things line up well and where there are going to be, decisions have to be made or something like that.
Yeah, I think normally we do that. You do the analysis, you get the existing conditions, and then you try to address those existing conditions with the strategies. But, Rick, I could call out more specifically, the identification of achieving the vision, what those challenges may be, given certain obvious impediments, like whatever the case may be, like a property ownership situation, or like Route 20 is I think is the prime example of a challenge that may inhibit a potential vision implementation or achievement of that vision. So what I'm saying is that we could build in language that states that challenges to achieving the vision will be explicitly stated and summarized.
Okay, as long as we're here, can we also just take that first sentence of 4.2 and instead of saying up to 1 day of interviews, just say the consultant will conduct interviews?
Well, there would probably need to be some limits there. You could definitely spend multiple days interviewing folks. So I think we can refine this. Instead of 1 day, we can say, up to 8 individual interviews, and then we could refine that, Rick.
Hey, Donnie, what we do a lot of times on these, because when we do proposals, we'll say up to 3 days permitting, but then they can just put a unit cost for each interview beyond that. So you put in your proposal for so much, and then if we need 4 more interviews, those interviews are at a unit cost of $1,000 per interview or whatever that number is.
Mm-hmm.
And put what we think it'll be, but let them put unit pricing on certain things. They can give us their hourly rates or a unit price for a meeting, and then we're kind of in control of it, and we don't get gouged later on. Oh, you want one more meeting, that's $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
When they're bidding it out, one more meeting may only be $500.
Yeah, Dario, we've done that as well. So I could build that in if you
Yeah, I
want.
think, because
So
then
could
we have
say-
flexibility.
Okay.
But I'm with you too, not leaving it unlimited, because then they're at risk, because if we decide to drag our feet and it's 30 meetings, they lose their shirt, so that's not fair to them either.
Yeah, and Rick, what could also be done is, for a recent plan, I had 8 individual interviews, and they were all virtual given the times that we're in. But we had multiple stakeholders in the same interview. So, a group that was representative of business owners, a group that was representative of public health concerns, and they all, played off of each other, and they all had something to contribute during those conversations. So that's another way of augmenting, the number of interviews that represents a limit here. To the total.
Donnie, could you
I
engage
just-
business owner, property owners in other ways? A direct letter or their own survey?
I mean, this is a scope of work to be refined by you guys. So if you think that that's, an opportunity, then, we can, build that in. I mean, there's multiple ways of reaching out to individual stakeholders or stakeholder groups. We've also had a roundtable, an economic development roundtable for recent plans where, like-minded individuals had a larger group meeting that was facilitated by a few individual folks and broken out. It was like a mini public meeting, just in some respects. And you can invite local property owners to that type of roundtable if that's what you're looking for.
Thanks.
So you can convert the stakeholder interviews, John, to up to 2 or 3 roundtables where you have half-day sessions. If that's and that's usually a little much to take out of somebody's day, but thereabouts, and then you have those conversations that are more focused.
Yeah, I would
any-
think sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to conclude, any way we can get direct feedback and engage those property owners to learn of the possibilities, would be the better. Just wanted to see a little more focus on that.
Yeah, I think if any group is going to have sort of a focus group discussion, it would be the business owners, the downtown business owners. I think engaging them in a more significant way, I think will be important to the success.
Is there another way to do this, to not put specific numbers of meetings or interviews in, and basically request a response from the responder that they tell us for these different phases where they need to do interviews or meetings for the price they're quoting, how many of these they anticipate doing, and beyond that, what the per unit cost would be beyond that, and let us then review their submissions and say, that one doesn't have enough, this one seems to be better, and that's something that would define why we would choose consultant A over consultant B based on this strategy for how they would engage these people and how many times they would do it and how much would be included in the stock price and what the unit cost beyond that would be. So let them come back to us and tell us based on this scope of work, how they would do these different engagements and how they would hold these meetings and what would be included in the price and what wouldn't be.
Yep.
And
RFPs
we wouldn't have to guess at numbers.
Yeah, RFPs run the gamut. They could be very, high level and expect the consultant to provide, the approach. or they could be very prescriptive and say, we expect that there's going to be X number of meetings. And there's, RFPs and scopes of work that are, somewhere in the middle. So, I mean, it's plausible. Rick?
I'd be willing to hear other people's input on the committee about, should we be specifying the number of meetings we want, or should we leave that open and have the responders tell us what they would do in the included price? What other people think?
Actually, if I may.
John, yeah, please.
Yeah,
John.
as somebody who's going to be responsible for bidding this out, I think it's helpful to have some basic parameters. You have in Donnie, somebody who does this work and has some sense of what it takes to get it done. And so my suggestion would be that you pick a reasonable number of meetings. And then with all of these proposals, you ask them to provide you with a schedule of costs for any additional services that you might need or decide to add on in the future. That also would require us to make sure that we have enough in the budget to handle the base contract with some flexibility to add or subtract a meeting here or there. But I wouldn't leave it open-ended, Rick, because I think you can get a $40,000 difference in the proposals, and it could just be based on the number of meetings or because they're guessing at what you think you need. So to the extent possible, in my opinion, would be let's put some reasonable parameters in here, and then if we need to augment that in the heat of the moment, have a pre-agreed upon cost for what that would look like built into the contract as an alternative. But I think if you just leave things open, and again, if you leave things open, you're going to get very potentially wildly different proposals. What you have here in terms of scope of services, though, is this is a pretty straightforward downtown master plan scope of services. You can tweak it a little bit, gear it towards Northborough, but it's the deliverables here and the process and the task that Donnie has laid out is what I would have anticipated more or less him bringing forward. So,
Well, let's talk about 4.2. Can we plug a number in that we're comfortable with right now? What should it be? Conduct how many interviews?
So Rick, what I was just gonna say is you can change the up to at least, and then say you expect a certain number. And if the consultant thinks that there's going to be more meetings that's necessary for the process, then they can do that and adjust their schedule of their fee proposal along with that. But if you feel like there's an at least number as opposed to an up to number, I'm writing it from the consultant side. So I'm giving myself an upper limit. But if you think that there's a bottom limit that, at minimum, you want to have X number of meetings, and I think that's what you're driving at.
No, I don't think, I'm not driving at that. I'm just saying that we just need, I think one of the things we need to do to finalize this proposal is fill in some of these numbers in terms of interviews and meetings. So seeing as we're sitting here on 4.2, let's decide what we want that to say.
I think it's ineffective to say 1 day of interviews. So to your point, come up with some other way to quantify it. If it's the word at least, that's fine, but it's probably unrealistic that it actually happens in 1 day.
So I'm going to butt in again. We do this, to VHB's point, we do this once a week. So we just put a number in, we take our best guess. And with what Rick's saying, if we say 3 meetings and 3 interviews, and you just put the number in, you will provide 3 meetings, you will provide 3 interviews. Then to go back to John's point, it's a very clear scope. It's apples to apples, but because things change, then we put the unit pricing in. Give us your hourly rates for the people, give us a price per meeting for this type and a price per meeting for that type if we need more. Then we know how much an extra meeting costs. So if we really want to do one, we know what we're getting into. And then back to John's points again, if we're spending whatever the amount is, $50,000, $100,000, and we know, gee, each extra meeting's $1,000. We talk amongst ourselves and we budget. All right, we'll never have more than 10 extra meetings. So now our budget is 110,000. Whether we spend the other 10 or not, we don't know. But apples to apples for bidding, and you just say 3 meetings of this type, 3 meetings of that type, whatever our best guess is. You don't want to be unreasonably high or low, but you put your best guess in, then the scope is very clear for competitive bidding. Everybody's bidding on the exact same scope. If they think there's more, then we get the per diem cost. And when we send out.
Dario, I agree with all that. Let's pick a number. Let's
That's
finish
fine.
4.2 and put a number in there.
That's
Donnie,
fine. The last thing I would say is if they think, whoever's bidding on it, thinks there's gonna be more, we would ask them to tell us that the day of the bid. So that if they anticipate more, we have an idea that these guys are gonna need more time than the other guys. So if we give them that opportunity when they submit the bid to let us know if they think they need more.
Right. So what number do we want to put in 4.2?
Can I give a number?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so you have, right now you have up to 8 interviews, including okay, just count the people that you've listed in 4.2. You've got owners, business owners, town officials and staff, local organizations, that might be able to be combined, but I doubt that you would get that one meeting would suffice for property owners, and you would probably need more than one meeting for business owners. So the number 8 right now is something I would be willing to discuss and work with, just counting the different groups you've got listed here.
That's fine. It's fine to me. Anybody have any other suggestions? Is that 8 a good number?
Yeah, I think that should be well sufficient, especially if some of these are being combined and they're more focus group interview.
Does that make sense to you, John? Kadir?
I would just add, conduct up to 8 combined interviews with key stakeholders.
Yeah,
Otherwise
but they're not, they all can't be combined because.
No. But what I'm saying is you can have multiple meetings with business owners, have multiple business owners or landowners in a meeting is all I'm saying, Julianne.
Okay.
Not combined everybody into one meeting. I think you're on target in terms of their specific groups, but you don't want to have an interview with each individual landowner, you know.
Right.
Like you
The only other
schedule some
thing,
groups.
the only other thing you might add is the duration of the meeting. Is it 1 hour or 8?
Right.
Some sense of how long the meeting is. Is it a day-long meeting, or is it a half a day, or is it an hour?
Yeah. They're typically, I haven't seen RFPs prescribe that, Dario, but you know, in our proposals, we usually say that the meetings are going to be 45 minutes to an hour.
Fair
Yeah.
enough.
I think
Just
that's
so people
reasonable.
get an idea what they're in for, because that's a big deal.
Mhm.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
So the roundtable for property owners was floated. Should we include that as a separate task? What is your suggestion?
I think that one combined interviews that John was talking about might do something like that. That's how they want to do it. So I think,
Okay.
yeah, in 1
I think
hour
that's
is good.
fine.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
All right.
Okay.
Should it say at least 1 hour? I mean, an hour can go by pretty fast. If you've got 6 property owners around the table, that doesn't quite seem long enough to me, but I'll defer to other people.
I think as Dario and Donnie have said, this is really about, you know, getting into the details on this is really more about having the bids be equal so we can measure them against each other equally. I think when it comes down to it, each consultant can use their judgment. Is that right? I mean, you know, if you're
Yeah.
providing a schedule of costs, you know, and things need to be adjusted, it can be adjusted.
Yeah, I mean,
I
if we're
see.
responding to a proposal that says, you know, conduct up to 8 meetings, you know, we'll put down, you know, the hour. But you know, we have the understanding, and I think Dario would agree that, you know, some of these meetings don't last an hour. You know, they go above, you know, to an hour and a half or so. But you know, in Julia, in my experience, the 1 hour interviews with even if they're combined, have been successful. as long as you have the proper facilitation and you're guiding, the responses and you're making sure that folks are on topic, the 1 hour is typically, is typically feasible and okay. But again, you have that flexibility to say, if we need to go over, we can go over. But again, people's times are precious, so we don't want to take up too much of their time during the day.
Good point. Okay, thank you.
As long as we're talking about meetings, can we go back to that number of meetings that the consultant's going to have with the committee? Was that whatever number that is? Yeah.
That's here, 4.1. Yep.
Yeah, so my sense is it probably would make sense at the end of each phase that there would need to be a meeting between the consultant and, let's say, the committee right now. It's going to be sort of managing this thing. So, at the end of at least phases, I'm not sure, let's just go back and just, so any phase that's going to produce a work document that makes some decisions about what's going to happen, as opposed to just leading into then setting up the next phase, it probably isn't important to have a meeting, but so we're going to have a meeting to start the thing off in phase 1. And then I think there needs to be a meeting after phase 2 to confirm the boundary of what the downtown is going to be. And then what's phase 3?
I
The
think, Rick,
analysis.
I think your idea is good. There should be there should be a facilitated meeting after each phase, and there are 5 phases. So you ask for 5.
Okay, so there'd be at least
yeah,
5 then.
Kickoff, project meeting analysis, public meeting prep, stakeholder interview results.
So what are we coming up with for a number here? If we take a meeting at the end of every
Yeah.
phase, plus those other meetings you're talking about, Donnie, what are we up to?
Yeah. I think it's just, I think you probably need 2 meetings there. And then you need a draft. And that's not including the final presentation review of the draft plan and with implementation strategy. So I think you're at 7 meetings. So 1 for the kickoff, 1 for the project boundary refinement, 1 to present the results of the analysis and the analyses, 1 for public meeting preparations and presenting the results of the stakeholder interviews. There's 2 public meetings, so there may be 2 meetings here as well.
Will that include the surveys too?
That should include the surveys. Yeah. And revisioning presentation. So the one, taking all of the feedback and presenting a vision, getting feedback on that vision, and then coming back to the committee and presenting the refined vision, and then presenting the draft plan with implementation strategy. And again, that last meeting would be the presentation of that final plan. So I'm seeing 8 meetings, Rick.
Okay, let's change it to 8.
And those are usually 2 hours.
Okay.
Now, the other thing you might want to consider, we go to a downtown vision sort of quickly in terms of the way it's written in the scope. We haven't defined the downtown planning committee, but you may get to a situation where there's differences of opinion of what the vision should be.
Mhm.
So that may call out for another meeting or 2 to work that out. So I would agree with Rick that putting in more meetings, public or otherwise, in the scope and getting it bid that way puts everybody on a level playing field. Then there's still flexibility in the actual implementation.
Yeah, Gene, I think, I changed this to at least 8, and then I made a note here about the unit cost. So
Yeah, and
any
I-
additional meeting that's necessary based
Right,
on that
yeah.
feedback, if meetings go over, if, we're not able to get through everything, if there's, a lot of discussion, if there's going to be additional meetings here, similar to the stakeholder interviews, that unit cost or that per additional meeting cost.
And I think it's important to remember that the consultants they don't need to be there for every meeting where we're kind of
Right.
working out all of these things. We have
Mhm.
homework that we can do without them, and sometimes it's helpful to really get down to the nitty gritty without wasting their time there. So we will have plenty more meetings than the 8. While we are talking, well, I'll let us wrap it. I just want to make sure we're wrapping this up. Make sure nobody else has any more comments on the number of meetings before I move on. Okay. I think that I really wanted to make sure that we touched on this idea of, and maybe we don't need to decide this now, but I thought it would be helpful to determine, is there going to be a downtown planning committee? Is this going to be a subcommittee of the master planning and implementation committee, or will the master plan implementation committee be sort of heading up this effort? And I just didn't know if others had thoughts on this. John, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, John Coder, because there's one thing in the master plan, but then there's been other, I think the last couple meetings that we discussed this, it was sort of, we don't need to create a brand new committee for this. So I just wanted to hear thoughts.
Well, I think there's a couple of options here. It would be, we could, as a town, we can create another downtown planning committee. I think you're gonna have a lot of overlap with the people that are on this committee that are gonna wanna be on that committee. And frankly, it gets a little bit repetitive and cumbersome. I think it would be reasonable for this committee, given its knowledge and background, to see this process through. I would circle back if the committee wishes to do that. I think that's the first thing, and I would recommend, if you do it, it's the full committee. It's not a subcommittee. If you're going to create a subcommittee, then let's just create another separate committee. But if this body would like to take this project on, I mean, the reality is when you look at what the committee's doing, your job is to line up these priorities, and then we sort of set them back, and then ultimately a master plan implementation committee is probably meeting on a quarterly basis after the initial round of prioritization is done. I mean, you have struck the two big things: the downtown master plan and sidewalk master plan with complete streets and that process. Those are very ambitious, very significant projects. But if the committee would like to, I think, shepherd this process through, I think that would be a reasonable request of the Board of Selectmen to modify the charge to take this through. The alternative is we're just going to create a duplicated committee, in my opinion, and split things off and just make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Anyone else have any opinions on that? Julianne and then Tracy?
Do you want me to make a motion that the downtown planning committee be that we strike that and just say that the master plan implementation committee will be the downtown, well, then we don't even have to say that we'll be the downtown planning committee. We'll just say.
We can just replace that.
Well, I think there just through the chair, if I may, there just needs to be a little bit of a closing the communication loop. So back to the Board of Selectmen, that this is something that the committee would like to do. I would fully recommend it. I can't imagine that the board wouldn't, and then in which case then that's how we proceed. So
Okay.
I just want to close that communication loop. I'm assuming the board will be in agreement with it, but we'll have that discussion, and then the RFP would just get modified accordingly and put out on the street.
Okay.
Yep.
And John, is that something you would bring that to the Board of Selectmen?
Yeah,
or?
I'd be happy to take care of that. Yeah.
Okay.
We did post the agenda for Monday already, so again, probably take it up at the next meeting, which we need a little bit of time. I think it probably is potentially a milestone to come back to the Board of Selectmen and provide a little bit of an update, including, they're probably going to want to see what the scope looks like and what's being envisioned. You guys have made some great progress. It might be a good time to come back and just give the board a little bit of update on where we are and where it is that we're headed in the immediate future.
Sure. Okay.
Before we close off the discussion,
Hold
this,
on, Rick,
I agree that the MPIC could do this, but it also talks about Donnie's suggested residents, local business owners. I think local boards and committees will have covered if we have our committee, be the planning committee, but do we want to, as we have these meetings with the consultant, do we want to appoint besides ourselves a resident or a business owner or business owners? So what's, I don't know, I guess,
Yeah, you don't really have a appointing authority. So what I would suggest is, as Donnie has laid out, is that as part of the process, we make sure that they have, as John Campbell has pointed out, they have a very large seat at the table for that process. Does that make sense?
so I mean, a large seat, does that mean that, let's say
We
there's going to
have-
be a meeting between the consultant and the committee at the end of every phase to review and approve what's done? Are there going to be other people besides the master planning committee sitting in on those meetings to give their input? Or is that not the way we're going to engage these other people? We're going to engage them separately? Or are they actually going to play an ongoing role as a part of the committee?
No,
mean,
I
the
think according to the process we have laid out here, they would be involved in providing the input through these stakeholder meetings and interviews as we discussed. And of course, the meetings are open and certainly they can provide input at any point in time. It's just if you're going to go down that path, Rick, then I think you probably need to, if we want to have sitting members, you're probably looking at creating another committee and changing the makeup of that committee. But I think there's,
I'd be interested
as
in
laid
other
out, there's a
people's
way to get that input, I think.
Okay, I'd just be interested in other people's comments before we change this 4-1 around to just be us. Does anybody else have any other comments
Yeah,
about, is
yeah.
that okay? Or
Tracy's been waiting.
No, it's fine. I'm fully in support of that. And I think we started this process concerned with how long is it going to take to actually make changes, and all of us feeling like we wanted to be exponential in the changes that were made. And I feel like adding a whole nother committee under what we're already doing, I agree with John, the duplication is there. And for that, I totally agree with moving forward with us being in that role, because we have covered a lot of ground, and that knowledge I think could be really beneficial just moving forward in an exponential way from a time standpoint. So that's all I wanted to add.
Jean Kennedy.
I think when you're focusing on a specific area, you want to include the people that are most affected by what you're going to do. So I would think, I don't know what the mechanics necessarily would be, but the consultant is selected, the selectmen announce the downtown study. It'll be the focus of the master plan implementation committee and other interested parties. And if there are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 individuals who live or work downtown who want to participate in that process, I'd like to see a way for that to happen, because the last thing you want is to go through sort of an inbred committee to come up with some sort of a final plan, and they're like, well, what was that all about? That's sort of my opinion.
Donnie, do you have experience with something like this in any other communities where, I guess, have you had experience with this sort of situation and being able to
No,
kind of do this hybrid?
to be honest, no. In terms of whether or not the implementation committee takes the reins or whether a new committee is formed, I think there's some good arguments on both sides. It's as long if the implementation committee is going to take the lead here, I think it's just imperative that the stakeholder engagement process is captures as much of the folks that are that have an ownership interest or work or live in the area, are engaged to the utmost potential, and that the implementation committee make sure that that process is set up. And I think in this scope of work we've done that to a large extent with respect to the stakeholder interviews, and the public meetings and the online surveys. And again, there's some flexibility in the online surveys too, to be And I just want to revisit that for just a second, because I did mention this earlier in the meeting, that there could be, more online surveys, and, you could have more targeted surveys as well, as opposed to general surveys that could speak to the issue at hand, which is just making sure that those folks that have that ownership interest, or that, otherwise live or work in the project area are targeted in terms of that, in terms of the planning process.
Yeah, I think this gets back to what John Campbell was saying. We need to make sure we're really giving them a robust seat at the table. So really, you're just, reiterating that, and that's important. I will say, just another plug on behalf of the Master Planning Implementation Committee taking this on. So much of the master plan was focused on this downtown, and there was an opportunity for people to come on to the Master Planning Implementation Committee. And I think everyone in town wants to see this move forward quickly and are expecting us to address the downtown. So I don't think it will come as a surprise, or that people will be uncomfortable or upset when this was sort of our charge already. But that's my 2 cents.
One other thing that just occurred to me, Ashley, into the larger group, is that you do have that task 2.0, the project boundary. So whatever committee is going to be guiding this process is going to be guiding it from the onset. And if you're not going to be defining the project boundary until task 2, then you don't know who's going to be within that project boundary, or have that ownership or greater interest in the area. So that just popped into my head in terms of the overall process and the flow of that process. So just another consideration.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
this is not my realm, the downtown planning. I'm utilities, but I just want to express my opinion. The Master Plan Implementation Committee is an amazing cross section that's been put together by the board and by the members here. And one critical component of planning studies, and I've done them in the past, Donnie probably agrees, that having the bird's eye perspective and not a pigeonhole perspective is critical, because it is for all of this downtown boundary area. And that bird's eye perspective is what this committee is made of. That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Scott. That's helpful. And I mean, I think back to Jean's point, ensuring that the folks that are really affected by whatever this downtown plan comes up with are being represented and are able to be a part of the stakeholder engagement, I think is crucial and will go a long way to making sure that their piece. Yeah, Julianne?
So I think Mr. Kennedy has a really good point there. And I'm wondering if that could be solved by, under 4.2 stakeholder interviews, when the consultant does these interviews, is it possible for any of us to be present during those discussions? I know it's an added burden on us, but there's nothing like being there and hearing the conversation.
You got to be careful of open meeting law violations. So who's going to be there? How many are going to be there? And so that's a consideration.
So it could not be a majority of us, but it could be 1 or 2 of us. Correct?
And yes, I guess you could.
Donnie, do you have experience with that, or any suggestions around that?
So in past stakeholder interviews, town staff has joined. If there was a specific area that a committee member had expertise in and wanted to listen in on, we did have 1 or 2 folks joining the meeting in the past. We don't want to overwhelm, I think, the participants by too many people that are listening. But 1 or 2 is typically, depending on the larger group, is typically not, it doesn't create impediments to participation, I guess.
And that's not something that needs to be decided tonight.
Yeah.
No, I do worry about stifling open conversation when members of the committee are there. So, but Rick, you had your hand up.
Yeah. I know, I kind of feel the way Gene does. I think if we're talking about having some of these people having a seat at the table is really at the times when the consultant and the committee meets to talk about where we are, what we're going to do and what we're going to agree upon. I'm not saying that everybody who lives and works in downtown has to be there. But I'm just wondering if there's a way that when these update and status meetings are scheduled, if there are certain people who are not committee members, but are stakeholders that we've identified as being important, if they have the ability to join the meeting, listen in and give their input, as opposed to just being a meeting between the committee and the consultant. So at least we have a number of people in the community who along the way are seeing where this thing is going and providing input, not just from their perspective, but as they get the larger and larger view of where this is developing, to continue to give input, which could be very valuable, and also to buy into it so they could be helpful as we start to get into the implementation phase. That way, if people outside of our committee that agree with what we did and help spread the word to the rest of the people in the area that we're going to do this. So I'd still like to see a way, if we don't have them actually as committee members, that we have some people from the affected community involved in some of the review and decision-making on where we're going with this thing.
I see.
I'm not sure what the method to do that is, but I think it'd be important, be very helpful, both in terms of getting a good product and also getting good acceptance of the product once it starts to get rolled out.
Yeah, I see Fran has her hand up, and I do have a question for you and Rick. When we did the master plan, there were folks I remember from the senior center that would come to most meetings and kind of provide input. I can't remember who else, but perhaps some people from the planning board that just continually attended and provided input. And maybe it could be something along those lines where there's an opportunity for these groups to attend the meetings and provide comments. But Fran.
Well, they certainly can attend these, and then you can open it up to, public conversation. I think, a couple of things. I think that it's a good idea for us not to develop a new committee. I think that both either you or Rick could attend any one of these on our behalf and bring it back to us. So to Julianne's point, we can then be privy to what's going on, a little bit more direct contact. I do just want to make sure that if we are going to be this committee as well as the implementation committee, that we don't forget that there's like 500 additional pages of actions that I would love to think that we're going to be able to figure out how to address some of them during the year-long process, or however long process this one task is going to have. And that's my only reservation about us not having either an internal subcommittee or a freestanding alternative committee.
Yeah.
Well, if I just may comment on that,
Sure.
is when you've got a long list of priorities, the idea is to narrow it down to 2 or 3 at a time, and you've pretty much done that. These are big initiatives. They're going to take a lot of staff time and resources. And so these are going to be the focus for the next year. That doesn't mean nothing else gets done. I think a lot of the other projects, as I showed when I provided that written update, there are a lot of things that are occurring and will continue to go on that the committee would get, updates regarding. But we just, as the person who has to manage the staff and the workload on the staff, we can't just keep adding more and more large goals. I mean, I think we need to pick a couple priorities and start to see those through. But to your point, Fran, the other stuff, there are a lot of things that are going to continue happening that we would be providing updates on. But as far as adding new major initiatives, I think we need to, be clear about what the capacity is for us at this point in time. So.
Understood.
So in terms of making that decision, I assume we need a vote for you to take anything to the Board of Selectmen, and I just can't tell if we're quite ready to make that decision yet, but yeah, Amy?
I agree. We should continue on to, like John's point, your point, Tracy's point, just because we've learned so much already, like with the complete streets and all of Scott's updates. So for a new committee to come in, they're gonna have to start over, or at least go back and listen to all the meetings. So, and I do think from the master plan, there were people who attended every time and it was open to public comments and they had plenty of opportunity to speak.
All right, well, I see, Rick, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I guess seeing as one of the people that was kind of have been pushing here to get other people involved, I'm okay with having the committee itself and the master plan implementation committee appointed as the committee that's going to oversee this project. I just think that we need to, as we go forward, define ways we're going to involve people more than just the tasks in 4.2 to keep them more involved, and we can figure out how to do that as we go along. Also, I want everybody's got to realize what you're signing up for here. This is going to turn out to be a lot more than one meeting a month once this thing gets rolling, depending how fast the consultant works and when he comes back with things that need to be reviewed. So just be aware of the fact that we may continue to want to meet monthly as our committee, or it could be sometimes the timing works out that our monthly meeting is a good time to review what's going on with the downtown. It could be other times our monthly meeting is not a good time to review what's going on with downtown. We're gonna have to meet other times during the month, which is fine, but just make sure that everybody's aware that's what we're signing up for here. There's gonna be a point in time, we're gonna be meeting a lot to do the job we were tasked to do as an implementation committee, and also now to do our new job as the downtown implementation committee. I have no problem doing all of that, but everybody's got to realize you're going to be called on to attend quite a few meetings at some point. That'd be my only comment.
Well, just to clarify too, at this point, we're saying we'd be the downtown plan committee, right? The result of that downtown plan, implementing the downtown plan, is that something we're talking about right now too?
I think that we're talking about getting through the downtown planning process, just like you did the master plan steering committee,
Right.
and then handed it over to a master plan implementation committee. In this case, we could get through this process, and one of the recommendations on the other side is to create a permanent downtown committee of some kind. You know, it doesn't necessarily need to be well, I don't want to jump ahead, but you may have a handoff at some point, in the future.
That's what I sort of envisioned, and that sort of committee would probably be much more populated by those stakeholders that are in the downtown. Okay, well, does anybody want to make a motion on
I
this?
just,
Sure, Jean.
excuse me, Ashley, could I just say one quick thing?
Yep.
If it's the consensus that this committee should do the downtown planning, absent any additional people, one alternative or add-on would be to go back to Donnie's surveys and do include specific targeted surveys. For example, business survey or property owner survey, where we literally send out questionnaires and get input from them, make them feel like they're part of the process, alert them to what's going on. And I think that may be one way to resolve what happens in the end when there's a plan, and at least they know they were contacted.
Yeah. And right now you have in there 2 online surveys, one of which is the visual preference survey. But perhaps we can increase that, Donnie.
Yeah, I will. And the other thing, Jean, is when you go, well, at least when we go into stakeholder interviews, we usually prepare a questionnaire ahead of the game, just so people can review them, have expectations about what the discussion topics are going to be, prepare some answers. And we usually provide that as an online survey these days, just because it's quick and easy. And that's a survey that's we could replicate for a larger audience, and not just those folks that are participating in that one meeting. So taking that survey, then expanding the participant list is to your point of targeting that broader sector and not just representatives of that sector. I think is can be built into the scope of work too.
I guess my only other comment would be, if we go ahead and vote to make the master plan implementation committee, the committee that's going to oversee this study, then the wording would be changed in the kickoff meeting to reference the fact that it would be the downtown, the MPIC would be involved, and then probably all the wording in section 3.1 would disappear. There'd be no need to define a downtown planning committee in the report,
Right. Right.
except
not-
if
yeah.
there's something, the second paragraph that talks about, the number of meetings would stay. But the
Right.
first paragraph, I guess, so you'd have to rework that 3.1, Donnie, just to make it consistent with the fact that the MPIC was going to be the committee that oversaw the project.
Yeah, yes, Rick. What I would do is I would just revise this to say that the chosen consultant will work with the master plan implementation committee. The master plan implementation committee will help guide the downtown vision plan. In the process, the consultant will meet with the committee at least 8 times for 2-hour meetings. ... So yeah, that sort of revision is in the works, or will be in the works.
All right. Do we have a motion on this?
I'd be willing to move that the master plan implementation committee directs the, I'm not sure how to phrase the master plan implementation committee will manage and direct the preparation of the downtown vision study.
We have a second.
That's the correct wording in that, but
I'll second.
Through the chair, we can't just say by consensus, make the request to the board to add that task to the committee's role and kind of
Okay.
leave it at that. And is there
Sure.
anybody that's in opposition to it, I guess is the question. So by consensus, the committee would like to serve in this role. So why don't I
Sure.
convey that back to the Board of Selectmen, and then it would just become
Okay.
the added mission.
Okay.
Assuming
So we
there's
don't
no-
need a,
Yeah, I think just, we're just talking through what makes the most sense here. And so, you don't want to pass a motion that says something that we really need to just confer, make sure the Board of Selectmen is on the same page. And then if they're fine with it, I don't know why they wouldn't be. I'll certainly make a good pitch for it. Then we'll just proceed accordingly. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Frank, I
that-
think this is what we signed up for.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay.
Great. Awesome. I think we have about 15 minutes left, and I had one more topic that I was hoping to discuss, but I just want to make sure everyone else, there aren't any other comments or concerns about the scope of work before I.
I just wanted,
Nice.
can I just make comment about this Route 20 thing here?
That's what I was hoping to talk about as well, Rick. Yeah, so let's tackle that.
All right, so we're getting down now into section 4.3.
Yep.
Where it talks about right now, it says in parentheses, not including Route 20 Main Street. So I think at a minimum, it's got to talk about that the plan has got to talk about how to mitigate the impact of Route 20 Main Street on the overall success, or how the project is going to be successful, given the fact that Route 20 is going to be, I'm pretty much assuming the project boundary is going to include, one way or another, Route 20 is going to be in the project boundary someplace. So as opposed to saying not including Route 20, that paragraph has got to talk about something around mitigating the impact of Route 20 or something like that. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, I think that's at a very minimum. I think, with everything we talked about at our last meeting, it's clear that Route 20 is a big part of it. There's not really going to be there's possibilities and things that we can look at to mitigate the traffic impacts there or add parking, but these are things that need to be looked at. And Route 20 is definitely going to be a part of downtown. I don't see any way that it won't be. And so I want to make sure that this scope of work is very clear, that whoever's taking this on is going to have to look at Route 20 and how to make it more pedestrian and bicycle friendly, and improve improve the downtown in that way. So I definitely wouldn't want to be misleading anyone to think that they can avoid that pretty difficult task.
And I think we've talked a little bit off and on at the meeting about, possibility that Route 20 could have been in the middle of the downtown. In other words, we've talked about the possibility of some areas south of Route 20 could be involved in sections north of Route 20 can be involved. And certainly if we start to draw a project boundary at some point around something like that, then mitigating Route 20 is going to be absolutely critical to how you get people back and forth from the south part to the north part kind of thing. If it turns out if we end up not doing it quite that way, then it's not quite so important. But it's seeing as we're not going to know when we go into this, it's important that the consultant understands that there's got to be quite a bit of consideration given to how to manage that. Also understanding that the state owns the property and we don't. So that's all going to be taken into account.
And just a question, Donnie, the way this is written, I can't tell if this sort of portion of the scope of work would include looking at traffic flow and ways to suggest changes, even if that is 10 years down the road when Mass DOT is looking at our town again. Is that something that could be looked at with the way that it's written now?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's broken up in terms of the mobility analysis and then in terms of looking at the roadways. But this roadway and streetscape design, yes, it's going to look at traffic and safety. Traffic flow is really part of that existing condition analysis, and then the strategies that are developed to help ease that flow or make that flow more efficient is going to be part of the visioning and the goal setting so it's not really part of this exercise, Ashley, unless it pertains specifically to the roadways that we're looking at. But it's definitely covered within the scope of work.
Okay, yeah, that's all I wanted to confirm. Okay.
Yep.
Great.
A couple of the comments, Ashley.
Sure. It sounds like Gene Kennedy has a question first.
Just one quick point. In reading the scope of work, the one term I didn't see very much of was the term housing. When you do a downtown plan, the whole concept of bringing people to downtown involves different types of housing, different densities, different heights, different number of stories, mixed use,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera. Donnie, in the visual preference survey, will that include a review of housing types to get input from respondents? Or are you
Yes.
thinking more urban design?
So it's a combination. So first and foremost, the market analysis, that's going to cover some of the housing potential. So we'll see what kind of housing is going to be supportive, supported by Northborough, given its proximity, given its floor plans, given a potential absorption rate. So that I don't do the market analysis myself. We have others that do it, so I'm not speaking as eloquently as I possibly could on the subject. But the market analysis does look at the housing potential. So that's a future looking. The analysis here is going to look at the land use and zoning. That's going to look at some of the housing that's extant or currently present within the project boundary as well. So it's mixed in here, Gene, across the board. But I think that you're right that how the word housing is underrepresented in the scope of work.
Do you think it may be worthwhile adding an implementation strategy that's housing specific?
So when you're talking about, yes, so here, that's what you mean?
Right, under 5.1 implementation strategy, just
Yes.
have something that talks about housing strategies or something that reflects the consensus of the process as to what type of housing would be supportive of the downtown vision.
Yes, absolutely. I could do that.
Okay.
It's sort of built into the urban design, but I'll call it out.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would want to see the same thing for business, like commercial development, but that really is baked into the urban design and development.
It is, because again, we're referencing that market study. We're looking at the results of that, and we're developing that scenario on, where everything is going to be situated, what can be possibly absorbed by the town, what would be reasonably successful, what that development strategy is going to be. So that's housing, that's commercial, that's other land uses and land types, including public access, public spaces, things of that nature.
Well, just, I don't have anything against adding a housing strategy, except that I don't want to adding housing under this strategy bit, except that I wouldn't want a consultant to come in and say, oh, we're looking at it here under this urban design and development strategy, and then we should look at it again under another, sometimes I've dealt with planners that really, I mean, they're really like, okay, now you want, here's another piece, like, now what do you want us to do here? Now it's here again. I just wouldn't want to confuse things, but if it's not confusing to you, then that's fine.
Well, what I could do to sort of meet the middle is just augment this particular bullet point, to call out housing, to call out economic development and different economic development types aside from housing.
Okay.
So just make more specific and specific references.
Okay.
Can I ask if under that urban design and development strategy, things like parking and parking spaces for downtown use is included, or is that too specific?
That, I mean, from my perspective, that was not the intent here. So, one of those other, if we go back to the slide deck that we presented a couple of months ago, on that slide, the additional services would have been, a downtown parking study.
Okay.
But when we look at the mobility analysis and when we look at the mobility strategy, I mean, the parking will be, of course, built into those these components.
Okay.
But Millie, this not a public. I mean, it's not a parking survey or study that's incorporated into the scope of work.
Okay.
I mean, do you feel like there should be, and do others feel like there should be?
I think at some point, and that might be when we get more into the downtown committees, but definitely at some point that would be something that would hopefully get addressed.
I don't see where it hurts to include it here because parking is an issue for us.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of cost and scope, is that like a huge ask, or is that, a reasonable addition to plan like this?
Donnie, you have parking as part of the existing conditions and technical analyses.
Yes. So parking is incorporated into this mobility analysis to a certain extent. But again, we're not so parking studies, they include, consultants or technical professionals going out and, measuring use, right? So we can inventory parking spaces, and that could be part of this assessment, but we wouldn't do percent uses in time of day use, if that makes sense, Scott, if you're familiar with those types of analyses. I mean, that parking utilization is a different component and a different study altogether. So we can generate characterize where parking is and what the inventory looks like versus off street versus on street. But again, as part of this, as I envisioned it, did not include a utilization.
Through the chair, so what could be a result of this downtown visioning study is identification of the need for a parking study in where the downtown boundaries are set. And these are the needs, these are the land uses that are suggested in that area, and there's a shortage or there isn't relevant to parking. So that may be a follow-up analysis moving forward. Sorry, Doctor.
Yeah, and of course, there's going to be a parking component to the urban design and development strategy as well, because if we're developing certain types of uses, we have to go back to the zoning bylaw and see what's required for those types of uses with respect to parking. Are those reasonable thresholds and minimums? And then, try to, or organize the development scenario in terms of what the appropriate amount of parking is and what's already versus what's already there.
Yeah, and this is Derry. I mean, it's just one of the legs on the table that can't be ignored, period, because you can't have any any building or space, whether it's residential, commercial, without parking. So I think it has to be part of this plan, but then it's a matter of, do we want additional study beyond that to verify that our parking count works? But there's no way you can do this without parking, because it's just, you don't have a front door to get in the restaurant. So yeah, it'll be a fundamental part. And I think to Don's point, eventually, if we want to verify that count works, we can hire another study, but the plan has to show it, and it's just a basic piece.
Yeah, no doubt it's going to be a big part of the conversation. I mean, there are communities that are thinking about decoupling parking and housing, and ramping up their multimodal transportation to accommodate that decoupling. So certain communities require parking minimums for certain types of development, and when you decouple that, you're saying that there's less of a need, and there's not as much of a requirement from a parking perspective. And then there's going to be the other camp that's going to say that there's not enough parking in the downtown and we need more parking. So that what my point is there's going to be robust conversation about parking as part of this planning process.
Guess my question is, I think that the illustrative graphics are going to do a lot to describe what it is we're going to try and do. So what I didn't see in 4.2 illustrative graphics was a reference to the illustrative graphics going to show where parking was going to be in the new downtown, nor did it really talk a lot about where retail and housing might be located. These are all things that have come up in the last few comments. But my feeling is that we're going to have a picture of kind of generally what this is going to look like, what's going to be where, how it's going to flow together. And so the picture should include some recommendation or information about where the parking is going to be downtown to some extent. And if it's possible, where areas for retail and housing development, might be. So I would add those three things to 4.2 as opposed to just say other components.
Yeah.
I would keep all the things that are in 4.2 now, and I would add that we would expect to see in this illustrative view something about where the parking would be, where there are areas for development of retail, where there's areas for development of housing. And that would all be color coded, or I go back to the thing you showed us at the very beginning from that town up in New Hampshire. You took a look at that picture and you had a pretty good idea of what it was you were shooting for. It didn't have a lot of details about how you're going to get there, but it gave you a graphic about this at the end, what we're going to get. And so I think this picture ought to show us something about where we think the parking is going to be and where these other features are going to be.
Yeah, I think there's still going to be generalized depictions, though, Rick, because you don't want to be too prescriptive about certain things. But certainly the streetscape and the roadway design will show a little bit more detail in terms of parking spaces. So, I mean, you won't see lines on parking lines on the plan view concept is my point. Or you won't.
We don't want to show somebody this picture, and the first comment we get is, "Well, that's never going to work because there's no parking in here."
Right. Yep.
It's got to be someplace in the picture.
Yeah.
I thought we talked about there had to be we talked about for the downtown to work, that there was going to be some description of providing some additional housing to get people down there, but I don't see any housing on the picture. So what happened to that? So I think the picture is going to be a very important tool for us to, first of all, get concurrence between us and the consultant. Yeah, that's what we really want. And then when we're done, to use that to educate the town that this is what we're shooting for.
Yeah.
And maybe we can then color code it into, this is what we're going to do first, this is what we're going to do second, this is what we're going to do third. It could sort of become the part that drives the plan.
Yep.
So let's make sure that 4.2 is pretty specific about what we want to see in those pictures.
Yeah. I agree.
The only other comment I had was, I think it's just a typo in 4.3 when it says about applying the trees to other parts of the downtown in the future. I think you mean other parts of the town in the future, right? it's not going to be like a phase one trees for downtown and then some subsequent trees for downtown later on in the future.
Yes, let me just reread that, Rick. So in addition to preliminary roadway design, the study corridor will be used as a pilot for promoting the planting and sustained growth of street trees, landscaping, and other green infrastructure in the downtown. Through this design, the consultant will develop a tree inventory process that the town or its partners can apply to other parts of the downtown. What I believe they're saying here, and if you remember Phil Goff from the last meeting that I attended, he's our transportation planner. The intent here, I believe, is to say, okay, well, we're going to look at those up to 2 options. We're going to have that we're going to have a pilot, study of what that what those 2 roadways look like. And then, for those roadways, we're going to do, a tree inventory to help, the design of that roadway. And that tree inventory process can be replicated in other parts of the downtown as the rest of the downtown is planned and green infrastructure is, and is built into the rest of the streetscapes. So I do think that this was correctly stated as downtown. But one thing that maybe Scott, is if you already have a tree inventory process that could be leveraged for this assignment, or if this is even necessary. This line.
We don't have a tree inventory. I think the recommendation as part of the study report would be to incorporate species considerations in any downtown development when looking at other surrounding streets. The intent for the purpose of the committee for a tree inventory is look at your trees, not only assess what you have and what their conditions are, but the species, are they appropriate species? Do you have a wide a breadth of species? So in the event there's an issue, whether it be with invasives or droughts, you don't lose your stock. You lose a species of stock. When you go up and down the streets, you'll see Norway maples everywhere. Well, if something happens, you lose all your trees, and you saw that happen with all of our oaks when the gypsy moths came in and the droughts came through. So the tree inventory intent is to make sure if we go forward, we have a good selection and variety of species.
Yeah, and Rick, I just put in parentheses or town-wide in the future. So I think the intent is really focused on the downtown, but there's the potential for that process to be replicated elsewhere.
Okay.
And that's what the landscape architects are for. They go through and they do that type of work.
All right.
Okay.
Well, great. We are coming to the end of our time. I didn't know if anybody else had any closing questions or comments before we wrap it up.
One more comment? I was just have a comment. So I guess the one thing that's coming out of this, it's still somewhat undecided, that probably we're going to have an idea around before we meet with the consultant the first time, is a proposed preliminary project boundary. So maybe that needs to be an agenda item for our next meeting to discuss as a group what we think that ought to be. We're going to have to get that figured out, because this is going to, these people coming in are going to assume that we're not going to start from scratch on that we're going to recommend at least something that we have in mind, and then ask the consultant to help us refine it. So we probably need to talk among ourselves and get some concurrence among ourselves as to what we think that at least preliminary boundary ought to look like.
I think that was Dario. I think that was part of this study, was for us to identify historic figures, natural features, where we want to work. And then when we say, hey, we want to work with the viaduct, and we want to work with the Assabet River, once we point out the 5 or 6 or 8 or 10, whatever it is, important figures, that then gives them, during this process, the definition of the boundary. I thought that's what the first parts of this was defining what we as a committee wanted to focus on to make the downtown. And once we got that, that was the first phase, as I read it, was defining all the important features in the town, and then that defines the downtown, as opposed to us doing it without their help. I think we say, here's the 10 things that are most important. We want to tie them together somehow. Some may be primary or secondary or tertiary factors. We're talking about walking trails and bike trails. And then once we understand all that, that's a huge part of this was defining that boundary. And Donnie, is that the beginning of it, or did I misread that?
No, that was all of task 2 is
That's what
really
I
looking
thought.
at that. Yep.
Yes.
And so I guess Rick's question is, do we need to have some sort of very rough idea or preliminary area kind of outline just for the consultant to be able to provide a realistic estimate, or can we
I
go into it without that?
I think
I
that first
think we
kickoff
could.
meeting is the implementation committee is going to be coming to that meeting with certain thoughts and certain suggestions and considerations for the consultant. So there's going to be a little bit of pre-work on the MPIC. It doesn't roll off the tongue. The MPIC's role is to have some pre-conversations, I think, and do a little homework to come to that kickoff meeting with some suggestions, some considerations, not necessarily a boundary, but considerations to bring to the table to aid the conversation and the process.
Great. So we don't need to define this for the RFP. So I think that's a good clarification. Okay. All right. So I think I'm assuming we need to take a vote on the final draft before, John, before this gets put together into an RFP. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a good handle on the scope here. Donnie will make
Mhm.
some adjustments to it. What we would do then is we would take the scope of services, place it into the overall template for an RFP that we would put out, that would have, the contextual information, typically a contract attachment and so forth.
Okay.
So I don't know
So
if you guys
perhaps-
feel like you need to see the scope one more time, or if you're comfortable with the adjustments that have been made.
Yeah, does anyone feel like they would like to provide, written comments between, after this meeting? Or do we feel like we've kind of addressed everything that was concerning? Or Julianne?
I'd like to have the opportunity to provide written comments. We could put a time limit on it, over the next week, but there was a lot tonight and I'd like to think about some things.
Okay. And Jean, you had a comment too?
Yeah, I didn't get to see the draft before Donnie presented it. So just to have a good look at it and then be able to make comments if there's a process for that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. So just to clarify, John, do we need to vote to approve it, or once we get comments, can I send
Yeah,
those off to Don?
you're not, I don't think you're there yet. So
Yeah.
I think you want to have the amendments and the adjustments discussed tonight made, distribute it back out, have people take one more look at it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So February, we take a vote and then we can
Yeah.
put it all out. Okay. All right. Okay. Great. All right.
Just through the chair, if I just may, my intention would be, now that this has been voted formally as a top priority of the implementation committee, I'm going to go with the IC. It rolls off tongue a little easier. My intention is to meet with the financial planning committee and try to work this into the capital improvement plan for the upcoming cycle. That would be the intent. So, so after we get the final scope, I might want to have a little chat offline with Donnie about what he thinks that budget number looks like after we've added more meetings and a few other expanded scope. I want to make sure we have the sufficient funding to do what it is that we're setting out here to do. So, but this would move forward. I'd let the committee know when the financial planning committee would be reviewing the request, so that it would go through that process, so people can attend that meeting if they wish to. But they've been well aware of this likely being the top priority, and that this has been put in as a placeholder. So this isn't anything that should come as a surprise to them in terms of that the funding is going to be requested.
Okay. And Bill wasn't here today, but he said he would watch the meeting afterwards.
Right.
So, All right. Well, great. I'm thinking, everybody has this draft, but Donnie, would you mind sending around with your updated comments once they're kind of all worked in, or the changes that were made today? And then people can work on the most up-to-date version.
Sure,
Um,
could do that.
All right, awesome.
You want to set a time limit, Ashley, is when the comments have to be to Donnie?
Yeah, I'm thinking, I think 2 weeks would be plenty. So if everyone can get everything in by February 4th, that would be good. And we can all be in well in advance of the February 17th meeting. So.
How
All
long will
right.
it take you, Donnie, to turn around a revised plan to us if you get all the comments by the 4th?
Or do you need more of the time than that?
Or it depends on the comments. But
I make a suggestion.
you know,
Could we send our comments to Rick and Ashley and then they forward the next version back to Donnie?
yeah,
Yeah,
a
we
consolidated
can
version.
condense. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, in a week's time, I could, pull it all together and wrap it up.
Okay.
So you're saying that the comments are due on the 4th?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You'd get back a revised copy to us by the 11th, and when do we meet again?
17th.
So if everybody got the revised document by the 11th or 12th, they'd feel comfortable that we can make a decision on the 17th on it?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So
I'll
move.
make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All right, roll call. Rick Leaf,
Aye.
Jean Kennedy,
I
Jean Cahill,
Aye.
Fran,
Aye.
Julianne,
Aye.
John Campbell,
Aye.
Amy,
Aye.
Tracy,
Aye.
Millie,
Aye.
and Dario, you made the motion.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned. All right, so Donnie will send out that